The hall was already full long before the event was supposed to begin. Rows of seats stretched from the stage to the back wall, and every one of them was taken. Some people stood along the sides, holding their phones, hoping to record even a small moment. Soft lights reflected off the polished floor, and the large piano at the center of the stage looked almost like a statue, waiting to be touched. The air felt heavy with excitement, the kind that only appears when people expect something special to happen. The famous pianist arrived to loud applause. Many in the crowd had grown up listening to his music. Some had traveled hours just to see him in person. He smiled, waved, and took a seat near the piano, clearly comfortable being admired. This was not his first time in front of a crowd like this. He spoke easily, cracking small jokes, telling stories about concerts and mistakes from his early years. The audience laughed and relaxed. The mood felt friendly and warm. As he talked, his eyes moved across the room, scanning faces. He seemed to enjoy noticing reactions, especially when people nodded or laughed at the right moment. Near the middle rows, there sat a woman who looked very different from most of the crowd. She wore simple clothes and no visible jewelry. Her hair was tied back without effort. She did not hold a phone or notebook. She just watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She did not look nervous or excited. She looked thoughtful, as if she was listening to more than just words. People around her barely noticed her. In a room filled with music students, teachers, and fans dressed their best, she blended into the background. If anyone noticed her at all, they might have assumed she came along with someone else. At one point, the pianist spoke about how music belonged to everyone. He said that a piano did not care who touched it. He laughed and added that sometimes, talent appeared where you least expected it. The crowd laughed with him. Then, with a playful tone, he glanced toward the audience and asked if anyone there wanted to come up and play a few notes. A few people laughed nervously. Some students looked away. Others smiled but stayed seated. The pianist waited, enjoying the moment. Then his eyes landed on the quiet woman. He paused for just a second, then pointed in her direction. "What about you?" he said lightly. "Would you like to come up and try?" A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Some thought it was funny. Others felt awkward. The woman looked surprised. She glanced behind her, as if checking whether he meant someone else. When she realized he was looking directly at her, her face tightened slightly. She did not stand right away. There was a long pause. The pianist chuckled, assuming she would shake her head. The room waited. Finally, she slowly stood up. The laughter softened, turning into quiet curiosity. She stepped into the aisle, her movements calm but careful. As she walked toward the stage, whispers followed her. Some people smiled, expecting a short, awkward moment. Others felt uneasy, wondering if the joke had gone too far. The pianist still wore a relaxed expression. He stepped aside and gestured toward the piano, as if welcoming her to a game. The woman climbed the steps and stopped near the bench. Up close, she looked older than many in the room, but not old. Her face carried lines that spoke of long days and little rest. She took a deep breath and sat down. The bench creaked softly under her weight. For a moment, she did nothing. Her hands rested on her knees. The hall fell into a strange silence, the kind that feels louder than noise. The pianist leaned slightly against the piano, arms crossed, still smiling, still certain he was in control of the moment. The woman lifted her hands slowly and placed them above the keys. They hovered there, not touching yet. Her fingers were steady, not shaking. She closed her eyes briefly, as if listening to something only she could hear. No one spoke. No one laughed now. Just before she played, she opened her eyes and looked at the piano. Not at the crowd, not at the famous man beside her. It was as if the room around her no longer existed. Then her fingers pressed down on the keys. The first sound was soft, almost fragile. It was not a mistake. It was not random. It was careful and clear. The room leaned in without realizing it. The pianist's smile faded slightly. He straightened his posture. The woman continued, letting the notes flow slowly. Each sound felt intentional, filled with feeling. The music was simple, but it carried weight. It sounded like memory, like longing, like something held inside for a very long time. People stopped shifting in their seats. Phones that were raised for a joke lowered again. A few faces showed surprise. Others showed confusion. This was not what anyone expected. The pianist glanced at the woman's hands. They moved with confidence, not the confidence of show, but the confidence of familiarity. His expression changed. He was no longer amused. He was listening. The music grew slightly stronger, still controlled, still calm. It did not rush. It did not try to impress. It simply existed, filling the hall with emotion that felt honest and raw. The woman's face remained calm, but her body leaned into the sound, as if she was speaking through the piano. In that moment, the joke disappeared. The room understood it too. This was no longer about embarrassment or laughter. Something real was happening. Something unexpected. The woman played on, unaware of how deeply she had already changed the room. And for the first time that evening, the famous pianist realized he was no longer the center of attention. The piano had found another voice. The sound of the piano continued to move through the hall, slow and steady, like a calm voice speaking the truth. The woman's fingers traveled across the keys with ease, not rushing, not holding back. Each note felt placed with care, as if she knew exactly where it belonged. The audience listened without blinking. No one coughed. No one whispered. It felt as though time itself had paused to listen. The famous pianist stood just a few steps away, no longer leaning casually. His arms dropped to his sides. He had heard many players in his life, some perfect, some flashy, some forgettable. This was different. There was no effort to impress. No show. Just honesty flowing through sound. He watched closely, trying to understand where this kind of playing came from. The woman's face remained calm, but her eyes stayed closed. Her shoulders relaxed as the music grew fuller. It was clear she was not thinking about the crowd. She was somewhere else, far from the bright lights and quiet stares. The piano seemed less like an instrument and more like an old friend she had finally met again after many years apart. People in the audience felt something shift inside them. Some remembered moments from their own lives they had not thought about in years. Others felt a strange tightness in their chest, without knowing why. A few wiped their eyes quietly, hoping no one noticed. This was not the kind of reaction anyone expected from a simple joke invitation. The music slowly changed, becoming a little stronger, a little deeper. The woman's hands moved with more confidence now, pressing the keys with purpose. The sound filled the hall, bouncing off the walls, settling into every corner. Even those sitting at the very back felt it clearly, as if the music had found them personally. The pianist glanced around at the audience. Faces that once showed amusement now showed respect. He looked back at the woman, studying her posture, her touch, the way she listened to her own playing. He realized this was not luck. This was not someone guessing their way through a piece. This was someone who understood music deeply. As the woman played, memories surfaced within her. Long evenings spent alone with a piano in a small room. Early mornings practicing while the world slept. Moments when music was the only place she felt understood. Life had taken her away from those days, pulling her into responsibilities and struggles that left little room for dreams. But the music had never truly left her. It had waited. The melody softened again, almost like a whisper. Her fingers slowed, letting each note breathe. The hall felt fragile, like one sudden noise could break the spell. No one dared to move. Even the pianist held his breath, afraid that any sound might disturb the moment. When the final note faded, it did not disappear quickly. It hung in the air, echoing softly, as if refusing to leave. The woman's hands rested on the keys. She did not lift them right away. She stayed still, eyes closed, letting the silence settle. For a brief second, no one reacted. It was not confusion. It was respect. The kind that stops people from clapping too soon. Then, slowly, someone in the back began to applaud. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the hall filled with applause so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. The woman opened her eyes, startled. She looked around, unsure if the reaction was meant for her. Her face showed disbelief, almost fear, as if she thought the applause might suddenly stop. She stood up slowly, stepping back from the piano. The pianist stepped forward, his expression serious, almost humbled. He raised a hand, and the applause slowly softened. He looked at the woman, then at the audience, then back at her again. "I didn't expect that," he said quietly. His voice carried through the hall without effort. "I don't think anyone here did." The woman said nothing. She simply nodded, her hands clasped together tightly. Up close, her fingers showed signs of long work, not just at a piano, but at life itself. The pianist asked her where she learned to play. His tone was no longer playful. It was respectful. The question felt heavy, filled with curiosity. She hesitated before answering. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. She said she learned many years ago. She said music was once a big part of her life. She did not go into details. She did not need to. The pianist listened closely, then asked why she stopped. The hall leaned in again. She took a breath and said that life happened. She spoke of responsibilities, of choices that had to be made, of days where survival mattered more than dreams. She said music became something she carried inside instead of something she showed to the world. The audience felt the truth in her words. Many understood that feeling all too well. The pianist nodded slowly. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain, as if he was realizing something about himself as well. He thanked her for playing. He thanked her for reminding everyone why music mattered in the first place. He turned to the audience and admitted that what started as a joke had become one of the most powerful moments he had experienced on a stage. His honesty drew even more respect from the crowd. The woman stepped away from the piano, preparing to return to her seat. But the applause returned, louder than before. People stood. Some cheered, not for fame, not for skill alone, but for courage. As she walked back down the steps, the room watched her differently now. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the quiet woman in the middle row. She was someone who had reminded everyone that true talent does not always sit under bright lights. She returned to her seat, heart racing, hands trembling slightly now that the moment had passed. Around her, people smiled, nodded, and whispered words of admiration. She looked down, overwhelmed, unsure how to respond. On stage, the pianist remained still, watching her for a moment longer. The night had taken a turn he never planned. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was only the beginning of a story no one would forget. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed heavy in the air. People remained standing for a moment longer than usual, as if sitting down too soon would make the moment disappear. When everyone finally settled, the hall felt different, quieter, more aware. The famous pianist returned to the piano, but his movements were slower now, thoughtful. He spoke again, but his voice no longer carried the playful confidence from earlier. He admitted that he had invited the woman on stage without knowing her story. He said the moment had reminded him that music does not belong only to stages, awards, or titles. It belongs to anyone who has lived enough to feel something worth saying. The audience listened closely, sensing that something honest was unfolding. He then surprised everyone by asking the woman to return to the stage. A soft wave of murmurs moved through the room. The woman looked around, unsure if she had heard correctly. Someone nearby gently nodded, encouraging her. She hesitated, then stood again, her legs feeling heavier than before. As she walked back to the stage, the path felt longer. This time, there was no laughter, no whispers of doubt, only quiet respect. She climbed the steps and stood beside the piano, unsure where to place her hands, unsure where she belonged in this moment. The pianist did not ask her to play right away. Instead, he asked if she would be willing to sit with him while he played something for her. The request caught her off guard. She nodded slowly and took a seat on the bench, leaving space between them. He began to play a familiar piece, one many in the audience recognized instantly. His playing was precise and powerful, every note landing exactly where it should. The hall filled with sound again, but this time, the woman listened differently. She listened not as an audience member, but as someone who understood the weight behind each choice, each pause, each breath. As the piece continued, the pianist subtly changed his style. He softened certain sections, slowed others, leaving space for emotion rather than speed. He glanced at the woman, watching her reaction. She closed her eyes again, nodding slightly, as if the music was speaking a shared language. When he finished, the applause was polite but restrained. The audience sensed this moment was not about performance. It was about connection. The pianist turned to the woman and asked her what she heard in the music. The question felt personal, almost intimate. She took her time before answering. She said she heard struggle. She heard patience. She heard someone trying to hold on to something meaningful while the world kept demanding more. Her words landed deeply, not only with the audience, but with the pianist himself. He admitted that much of his life had been spent chasing perfection and approval. He said that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how music felt when it was played simply to survive. He then asked if she would play again, this time not alone. He suggested they play together. A quiet gasp moved through the hall. The woman's eyes widened. She shook her head slightly, unsure. The pianist waited, not pushing, not joking. The silence stretched. Finally, she agreed. They adjusted their positions on the bench. The closeness felt strange at first, two lives from very different paths meeting at the same instrument. He asked what key she preferred. She answered softly. He nodded. They began slowly. The pianist followed her lead, allowing her to set the tone. The first notes felt careful, like two people learning how to walk together. Then something shifted. Their sounds began to blend, not competing, not overpowering, just listening. The music that followed was unlike anything the audience had heard that evening. It was not perfect. It was not rehearsed. It breathed. It moved. It told a story of two people meeting in the middle, both changed by the experience. The woman played with more confidence now, her hands steady, her heart open. The pianist matched her, sometimes stepping back, sometimes supporting, never dominating. He smiled quietly, not for the crowd, but for the moment itself. The audience felt it too. Some leaned back, letting the sound wash over them. Others leaned forward, afraid to miss even a single note. Felt less like a concert and more like a shared confession. When the final chord faded, the silence that followed was deeper than before. No one clapped right away. No one moved. Felt as though the room needed time to breathe. Then the applause came, stronger than anything earlier. People stood again, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. Tears were no longer hidden. Smiles were no longer restrained. The woman stood slowly, overwhelmed. The pianist stood beside her, bowing his head slightly in her direction before turning to the crowd. That small gesture spoke louder than words. He told the audience that moments like this could not be planned. They could only be allowed. He said the woman had reminded him that music begins long before fingers touch keys. It begins in life itself. He asked her one final question on stage. He asked if she still played at home. She smiled faintly and said yes, sometimes late at night, when the world was quiet enough to listen. The pianist nodded, understanding more than he could explain. He encouraged her to keep playing, not for stages or crowds, but because the world needed honest sound. As she left the stage again, the audience watched her with a sense of knowing. They had not just witnessed talent, they had witnessed truth. And deep inside the famous pianist, something had shifted permanently. The joke from earlier felt distant now, almost shameful. In its place was respect, humility, and a renewed understanding of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. The night continued, but everyone knew the heart of it had already passed. And though no one said it aloud, many felt they had just seen a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The hall had settled into a quiet that felt heavier than before. People no longer whispered, no longer shifted in their seats. The energy from the previous moments lingered, making the air feel alive yet fragile. The woman had returned to her seat, but her presence had changed. She seemed different, even to herself, as though something inside had shifted and could not be undone. The pianist remained on stage, alone for a moment, staring at the piano. He had performed for countless audiences, but he had never experienced anything like this. It was as if the music had opened a door he did not know existed. He looked back at the woman and realized she had walked through it without intending to. It was a quiet kind of power, one that came from living a life of patience and resilience rather than seeking applause. After a few moments, he spoke again. His voice was softer this time, thoughtful rather than instructive. He addressed the audience, explaining that not all talent is measured by awards or public recognition. He told them that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities lie hidden, waiting for one moment to shine. The crowd listened in silence, understanding more than words could convey. He then invited the woman back on stage, not as a joke, but as an acknowledgement. The audience felt the difference immediately. This was no longer about surprise or amusement. It was about recognition. The woman hesitated at first, unsure if she should rise again. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze, and it was almost overwhelming. Slowly, she stood and walked up, her steps deliberate, her breathing steady. When she reached the piano, the pianist stepped aside, giving her the space she deserved. He asked if she would tell them a little about her journey, not as an explanation, but as a story. She nodded, a quiet courage filling her expression. She spoke softly, recounting the years she had spent learning music in her youth. She told of mornings and evenings spent alone with the piano, practicing until her fingers ached. She spoke of the joy it had brought her, and of the dreams she once held for a life filled with music. Then she shared the hardships that had forced her to step away, the responsibilities, the choices, the moments when survival came before passion. The audience listened, captivated by her honesty. Her voice was not loud, but it carried weight. Every word felt real, every pause meaningful. People nodded quietly, some wiping tears, others simply holding their hands together, moved by the truth of her story. The pianist watched, realizing that her life had shaped her music in ways he could never imitate. After she finished speaking, he asked if she would play once more, this time for everyone to hear her story in notes rather than words. She hesitated, feeling the gravity of the moment. The applause this time was different, gentle, supportive, almost reverent. It gave her permission to share herself without fear. She sat down, fingers poised above the keys, taking a deep breath. The first note came slowly, deliberate, and confident. As she continued, the music told the story she had just shared, each note carrying emotion, memory, and strength. The hall became a living canvas, painted with sound. The pianist watched closely, taking in the subtle shifts in her tempo, the way she emphasized certain notes, the way silence between phrases spoke as loudly as the keys themselves. He realized that this was not about technical skill alone. This was about life experience, about a depth of feeling that could only come from living through hardship and still finding beauty. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few held their hands to their chests, as if to contain the emotions that the sound evoked. Every person in the room felt connected to her story in some way. As the final notes faded, a hush fell over the hall. No one moved. It was as if everyone needed a moment to process what they had witnessed. The music had spoken where words could not, revealing a truth that could not be ignored. Finally, the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder. People stood, clapping and cheering, some crying quietly, some smiling broadly. The woman looked around, overwhelmed, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. She had shared a piece of herself that she had kept hidden for so long, and the world had embraced it. The pianist approached her, offering a hand in genuine admiration. He thanked her for trusting him and the audience, for allowing them to see the beauty that had lived quietly inside her for so many years. She shook his hand, feeling the warmth of genuine recognition, a feeling she had not known in a long time. He then turned to the audience, explaining that moments like these were rare. They were not staged or rehearsed. They could not be forced. They happened only when honesty and courage met, creating a moment that could change everything. The woman stepped back, a quiet smile on her face. She returned to her seat, her heart still racing. Around her, the audience remained silent for a few moments longer, reluctant to let go of the feeling the music had created. As the event continued, people approached her, offering words of admiration, asking questions, sharing how deeply they had been affected. She responded with quiet gratitude, realizing that she had not just performed for a crowd. She had touched lives, including her own. The pianist remained on stage, reflecting on what had happened. He understood now that the joke that had started the evening had become a catalyst for something far greater. It had reminded everyone present that talent and courage could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. By the end of the night, the atmosphere in the hall was transformed. People left with a sense of wonder and inspiration, carrying with them the memory of a woman who had turned a simple invitation into a profound experience. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, the woman knew that she had finally reclaimed a part of herself that she had thought was lost forever. The night had already carried moments that no one in the hall would forget. The woman sat quietly in her seat, her hands resting in her lap, her mind still echoing with the sound of her own music. The applause from earlier still lingered in her ears, a gentle reminder that the world had seen what she had carried silently for so long. She looked around, noticing the faces of the audience. Many still turned toward the stage with awe. They had come expecting an evening of familiar performance, but what they had witnessed was something far more human. The famous pianist walked back to the center of the stage, taking a moment to look out over the crowd. He had performed countless times, played for royalty, and spoken to packed halls, but this evening had shifted something inside him. The joke that had begun as a playful moment had turned into a revelation, a reminder that music was not only about skill or fame. It was about honesty, courage, and the quiet strength of life itself. He motioned gently toward the woman, inviting her to come forward once more. She rose, her movements steady but cautious. The audience watched, silent now, understanding that this was the true climax of the night. No one whispered or chuckled. The space felt sacred, filled with the collective respect of those who had seen something rare and authentic. She walked up to the stage, her steps deliberate, and stood beside the piano, her gaze focused on the keys, her hands lightly resting above them. The pianist stepped back, giving her the space she deserved. He asked if she would play one final piece, something that expressed her journey, something that spoke of the years she had spent away from the music, of the hardships, the choices, and the moments she had almost given up. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a brief moment before letting her fingers meet the keys. The first notes were soft, hesitant, yet they carried a depth that immediately captured the audience. Her playing was no longer about proving herself or responding to the moment. It was about telling her story through sound. Each note seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, a place shaped by life's trials and triumphs. The hall became completely silent, every ear attuned to the music, every heart quietly following the path she was creating. As she played, the sound shifted and grew, weaving a story of struggle, hope, and resilience. The pianist watched, amazed at how naturally her emotions flowed into the music. He had never seen anything like it. It was not perfection or technical brilliance that made this moment extraordinary. It was authenticity. It was life distilled into sound, pure and unfiltered. The audience felt it too. Some leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away. Others closed their eyes, letting the music reach into places they had forgotten. A few held their hands to their hearts, overwhelmed by the emotion the woman conveyed without a single word. It was as if the piano itself had become a mirror for their own experiences, reflecting pain, joy, and hope in a way that was impossible to ignore. The piece continued, growing in intensity but never losing its careful control. She allowed pauses between phrases, letting the silence speak as loudly as the notes. Every movement of her hands was deliberate, thoughtful, and filled with meaning. The room seemed to breathe with her, caught in the rhythm of her story. The famous pianist, standing beside the instrument, felt a sense of humility wash over him. He realized that this was not his stage anymore. It had become hers in every sense of the word. When the final chord rang out, it was not abrupt. It lingered, a gentle echo that filled the hall and then slowly faded. The audience remained still for a long moment, as if reluctant to let go of the magic that had unfolded before them. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, a ripple of sound that grew into a wave of clapping and cheering. People stood, some wiping tears, others smiling with quiet wonder. It was a standing ovation, but it felt different from any other they had given. It was not for showmanship or celebrity. It was for courage, for honesty, for a life lived fully, quietly, and beautifully. The woman stood, overwhelmed by the reaction. She looked out at the crowd, taking in the faces, the smiles, the eyes shining with emotion. She had not expected this. She had not even come expecting to play. Yet here she was, having shared a piece of herself that the world had embraced without judgment. She felt a warmth inside, a sense of validation that was deeper than recognition. It was the feeling of finally being seen. The pianist approached her once more, his expression full of respect. He thanked her sincerely, acknowledging the bravery it took to share so much of herself so openly. She nodded, finding her voice to whisper a quiet thank you. The audience continued to applaud, sensing the significance of the moment, understanding that they had witnessed something far greater than a performance. After a few minutes, the applause softened, and the pianist addressed the crowd again. He spoke about the unpredictability of life and music, about how greatness is not always loud or obvious, and how sometimes the most profound talent can sit quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. He praised the woman not only for her skill but for her courage, for the authenticity she had brought to the stage. The audience listened intently, absorbing every word. The woman returned to her seat once more, this time feeling a sense of peace she had not known for years. People approached her afterward, offering words of admiration, sharing how deeply they had been moved. She responded with quiet gratitude, realizing that she had not only played for herself, but had touched the hearts of many others. It was a connection she had longed for but never expected to find. The pianist stayed on stage for a few moments longer, reflecting on the evening. He knew that this night would remain with him forever. The joke that had begun as a playful challenge had transformed into a revelation, a reminder that life's most beautiful moments often emerge from the unexpected. The music had been the bridge between past and present, between hidden talent and recognition, between life's struggles and the joy of expression. As the hall slowly emptied, the energy remained. People spoke softly to each other, reliving the moments they had just witnessed, sharing their impressions, their feelings, their wonder. The woman walked slowly through the crowd, her heart full, her mind quiet with satisfaction. She knew that something had changed, not just in the eyes of the audience, but within herself. She had reclaimed a part of her life, her passion, that she thought was lost forever. The pianist stayed behind for a moment, sitting at the piano, letting the silence surround him. He realized that the true lesson of the night was not about skill or fame. It was about courage, honesty, and the quiet persistence of the human spirit. He felt gratitude, not for himself, but for having been present to witness someone else's truth. The woman stepped outside into the cool night air, carrying with her a sense of liberation and fulfillment. The applause, the praise, and the recognition were all important, but the most significant part was the quiet certainty that she had found her voice again. She had allowed herself to be seen, to share her story, and in doing so, she had transformed the lives of everyone who had listened. And in the hearts of those who had watched and listened, the memory of that night lingered. They remembered not just the music, but the courage and authenticity it represented. They would carry it with them, a reminder that greatness can be quiet, that true talent does not always seek the spotlight, and that one brave moment can leave a lasting impact on countless lives. The woman had stepped onto a stage expecting nothing, and in return, she had given the world something unforgettable.